We all set?
We're going.
Okay, let's go ahead and start then. Welcome,
Okay.
everybody. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes for February 18th?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Is Reed here, or?
I don't see him.
No.
I can do that.
Okay.
I have not heard. He may, maybe he, his alarm wasn't set for earlier today. I don't know. Just to let you know, many of you have come to our work sessions over the last 3 city council meetings, and we appreciate you for attending and to being a part of that. It's not a requirement. It was an invitation. But for those that were there, I think you made a difference in helping to provide an interface between us as staff and also the consultants that we had, which are Will Collins and Associates, and then also with Lewis Robertson Birmingham, and interfacing with the council, because they received your vote of support, if you will, and your testimony of all things that we are doing here and your support. So that goes a long ways with the council, and we do appreciate that. We reviewed the master plans about 5 weeks ago. We made them aware of all of the needs that we have projected over the next 5 to 10 years. And then we said this is going to cost a lot of money. And then 3 weeks ago we came forward and presented to them our utility fee rates that are proposed to be able to support these plans, which I think are very well thought out and contemplated and spread out over time to be able to be paid for by multiple generations, because they're multi-generational assets. And then last week we talked about impact fees, and with new developers coming in to the city, what it would cost them to basically buy in on a per lot basis, if it's residential or commercial or whatever it might be. They've asked us to come back and provide some additional information on what that would cost for like a single family home to come into the city. It would be around $20,000 to be able to do that, to buy in for all of the impact fees, which are sewer, water, stormwater, parks, streets, transportation, and then fire. I think there were 6 or 7. I think I got them all.
And police.
And police. Thank you.
20,000 for a single family home.
Yeah. Yep.
But they don't have to accept it. They can adjust it if they want. So.
And if they bring water to the table, then a good chunk of that is not a part of that. So the water supply fee was around $6,000 to $7,000 for an impact fee to come in as a single family home. But they can bring their own water rights and then deed those to the city. It's never happened, but it is an option for them to do that as well. So those meetings went well. The tentative budget is going to be adopted in May, so in the next month, and then the final budget will be adopted in June. Good morning. So again, appreciate your support in that area. Any questions or feedback or?
No, I thought they were pretty well received as the presentation went through it. So.
Yeah. There are a lot of questions, but I think overall they did accept that. So for new development, it's not going to affect. I know you seem a little concerned there because the number is high, but what it is it's for those that are coming onto the city and buying in. And so, in other words, if we weren't to press that upon them to be able to pay for that, then we would be absorbing that as citizens. And so, for all the new development, we would be subsidizing their new development to come online.
I understand.
Okay. All right. And there's a comparison that the Home Builders Association produced as well. They have a table on that. They've been doing that since the impact fee law was adopted back. I don't know how long that's been, 10 years or whatever. And so we're comparable with others. We're not high, we're not low, we're kind of in the middle.
Okay.
So with that, I'll turn the time over to Tyler and Charles.
Want me to jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, Charles.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Charles Allen with Parametrix.
we've been hired by the city to do a transportation utility fee feasibility study. So we're looking at how these fees can be implemented in Orem and setting a course for the city to do that. First of all, I can tell that this is a room full of doers. Because today's the deadline for tax filing, and you all look relaxed. There's nobody here that looks stressed out. And the fact you're all here, so you must have it all done.
Yeah.
So we got a lot of doers today. Glad to be here with you. There's a fundamental principle with asset management that good roads cost less. Pavements have a life cycle, and they follow a degradation curve. They're going to wear out, whether we use them or not. There's factors like weather and changes in the soils that affect the condition of the roads. And so if we're able to catch that early and do regular maintenance, then it costs us a lot less in the long run. If we let roads degrade, then we have to get to the full reconstruction project, and that's much more costly than the regular preventative maintenance. It's much like, maintaining other things, where if you do the little things, you do the oil changes on your car pretty regularly, you can save yourself the cost of the big repairs, or at least to defer the cost of the big repairs for a long time. The challenge many cities struggle with is, where do you get the funding source to be able to do the regular maintenance? A lot of cities really want to do the regular maintenance, but they just can't always find a sustainable, consistent funding source that lets them do these little treatments over time. So as a result, the maintenance treatments get deferred, and then we run into this costly reconstruction projects. The graphic on the left is a graphic from UDOT. They do this very well. In this graphic, they show how, if you look at the pavement condition, it starts degrading over time. The relative costs of the preservation and rehabilitation treatments are pretty small. And then at some point, even those maintenance treatments aren't enough, and the pavement needs to be reconstructed. And in this graphic, there's these relative comparisons between the costs of maintenance and reconstruction, $1 and $4 versus $25. So there's a lot of good return on investment for doing regular maintenance projects.
This is really the heart of what we're looking at. Can I make some
Yes,
comments
please, go
on
ahead.
this? So we have the similar chart. Bill Peterson is over our streets division, and he manages this. And we call this over here, this is a pavement condition percent. What we call it is an overall condition index. It's very similar to that. If you let the street just degrade over time without any treatments, your condition or your rideability or if you have potholes and so forth, you're going to start seeing that as you come down below 60%, 40%, and so forth. But if you apply small treatments over time, you're going to extend that life and maintain a higher level of condition. And so until ultimately you have to go to reconstruction, which every road will have to do at some point. But we're just trying to delay that as long as we can and make it as cost effective as possible.
Can I ask a question? Do you have a restriction on when you put new pavement on or new road base? Do you prohibit access or digging down in the first couple of years, for example? Or
Yeah, I believe is it like 3 to 5 years?
5 years?
Is it 5 years? We prohibit that, yeah.
Good. I think that's an issue.
So if we were to reconstruct a road, we wouldn't allow any cuts in that road for 5 years.
I think that's right.
Yeah, and so we also follow that rule. And when we're asked to look at a road, and there's a road called 950 North, for example, in Orem, we've been asked to look at that. The condition of that is not in great shape. And we do know that we have utilities under that road. So we were asked to look at that, and we feel like it needs to be, is it an overlay or reconstruct? 950 North from 4th to 8th. That'll be a reconstruct. Very costly, a half-mile reconstruct. You can see the numbers on here are 25 times as much as what it would cost just for a simple slurry seal or something like that. So with that in mind, we have to go back and look at all of our utilities, sewer, water, stormwater, and we have to look at the condition of those. We look at the age of those. We actually dig down a pothole on each one of those lines, and we verify the condition of those. If we feel like it's suspect and it might blow up, during construction, like a water line, it may not be in very good shape. If it's an old cast iron line, for example, the odds are that it's probably going to leak and blow up, and we don't want to have that happen right after we construct the road. So we have to go back and evaluate all of those. We would have overlaid that or reconstructed that sooner, but we have to spend a lot of money down below before we build that on top. That kind of, it's similar to what your question is, but we don't want to look bad and have to dig up a road shortly after we reconstruct it because the utilities are failing. So it's quite a coordinated effort among all the utility groups that are represented here.
Another question?
Yeah, sometimes other utilities come in and say, I'm sorry you've repaved it, we're going to cut in.
We tell them no.
Do you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You have 5 years.
It's pretty typical. It hasn't always been, but it's gotten typical among cities and counties now as well.
They do have a fee for that. They do allow them to charge money for that. Try to deter them from it. Of course, it happens.
Generally, the fee is a little bit too high for them to consider. We would tell them no, and then if you want to pay the high fee and restore this, then you can. But it's a major effort for a small amount of work. A lot of money.
So all cities would love to have a consistent funding source for roadway maintenance, but that's not always available. One of the sources cities frequently use is called B&C road funds, which comes from the gas tax, but the gas tax has a decreasing revenue power over time due to increased fuel efficiency of cars, more electric vehicles, etc. Sometimes cities are pulling money from the general fund, sometimes they are bonding to use money for roadway maintenance, and that presents its own challenges because there's a bonding cycle. Generally, a city issues a bond, like a property tax bond. They get the money, they do a bunch of pavement projects for 3 years, and then they spend the rest of the 7 years paying off the bond. So it's not a consistent funding source. So that's where transportation utility fees come in. They're a mechanism to provide a more consistent and regular funding source for roadway maintenance, and also to have that revenue be generated proportionally amongst the users of the road. So, to read through the definition of transportation utility fee is a financing mechanism that treats transportation system like a utility in which residents and businesses pay a fee based on the use of the transportation system rather than, for example, taxes. If it's a property tax, it's based on the property that they own. So this has different names depending on other parts of the country that you might be in. It could be called a road user fee or a street utility fee, a street maintenance fee, or a utility transportation fee.
Question.
Yeah, question.
How is that collected?
Yeah.
Yes, good question. It can be, cities can set up differently depending on the way they're billing for other utilities, but most cities fold it into some existing utility that they're billing for, like water or power if they provide their own power, or sometimes even sewer. So
How
it
does
shows
Provo
up
do
on
it?
someone's.
How does Provo do it?
Provo does it on their electric power bill, since they have their own power. But yeah, so it gets kind of folded into your monthly, utility fee from the city.
Shows you a set amount. Just as a point of clarification, I actually sued Provo when I was with the county attorney's office to stop this happening. Now things have changed quite a bit since then. When the case went up to the Supreme Court, I was surprised they went that way they did with it, given the fact that you look nationally on which courts have adopted these or allowed these to happen versus which courts haven't. The courts that have been tend to be more liberal states, and so it's been an interesting thing. But what they've typically done though is they put like $15 or some sort of monthly fee in your bill, which I think Pleasant Grove was 15. I'm not sure what Provo's is now, but
It's around 3.
3.
And it depends on the land use. The bigger trip generators, the ones that have more traffic coming to and from the property, they pay more than those.
But really the objective here, particularly in Provo, is if you have churches, you have other kinds of things that are not taxed typically, this affects those folks. Like, so Utah County was being charged a fee even though we're tax exempt back at the time. So it affects tax exempt parties. That's why they kind of go after this way. I think it helps get across the board much better that way. That's a better way to do it.
And
I
if
wasn't
may-
even aware how that fee was done, so.
He's going to tell us how the right way to do it is.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
because there are examples of absolutely the wrong way to do it.
Uh,
Some cities, to remain nameless, just charge it based on if they have a meter or if they have a property. They divide the number of millions of dollars that they need by the number of properties or the number of meters, and then do it that way, without looking at the overall impact that that property has from a traffic perspective. What Parametrix and his organization does is they look at it more scientifically on a parcel-by-parcel land use basis, on a trip generation basis, based on national standards and local standards that make it fair, more fair for everybody based on their impacts on the street itself.
So a gas station has a lot of traffic in and out, and a residential doesn't.
Relatively, yes.
They use it that way.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Let me jump to some example fees. Provo is the first city in Utah to enact a transportation utility fee, and they said they're scheduled based on land use. So on the right here, you can see they've got it divided into residential land uses, commercial land uses, and then public use. And the monthly fee, that's the original monthly fee, they since raised it by 5%. It's shown on the right. So single-family homes generate more trips than a multifamily home, so they pay a little bit more per month. And then the commercial properties are split into these four categories.
Again, if
based
I'm
on-
a duplex, I pay 2 of those.
Right.
Yes.
Per door.
Yep.
Per
It's
unit.
per door, yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
ADT means average daily traffic. So if you're a property that generates less than 100 trips to and from your property per day, you fall into commercial category A. You pay $9.50 a month, and then the more trips you generate, the more your monthly fee is going to be. So like your gas station, for example, lots of trips. They usually fall in this last category, greater than 600 trips per day. So their fee is $225 per month. Public use represents schools and government buildings, libraries, and they fall into 2 categories. So that's the way Provo City set it up. Other communities have taken other approaches. Here's Kaysville over here. They've got 3 commercial categories. They put schools and churches down here, and they've based it on square footage. So just the size of your property. We found that there's a balance between setting up a fee, between making it fair or proportional and making it easy to administer. So the more complex you have it, the more fair it is. Every property's paying closer to what its actual trip generation on the roadway is, but that starts to get difficult to administer for thousands of properties that might be within the city. Other communities have gone pretty simple. Highland City's just got a flat $18.50 per property, no matter the type of property that you have. Others move into a little bit more, next stage of complexities. Mapleton, they just say, hey, if you're residential, you pay this. If you're commercial, your fee's $12.
And these cities are all doing it.
That's correct.
How long has Pleasant Grove been doing it?
They started in 2017.
Before the lawsuit.
They were
They were the lawsuit.
They were the lawsuit. Yeah.
They were the lawsuit.
When you said Provo, did you mean Pleasant Grove?
No, I see Provo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Way back
And they're
in
very
2013.
Yeah.
And they're relative.
Okay.
But the one that
Yeah,
went
they're
over
so
to the
terrible.
Supreme Court was
But the
Pleasant Grove's case.
Supreme Court overruled it and made it lawful. Pardon?
Correct. That was Pleasant Grove's case.
Yeah.
It wasn't Provo's
So
case.
did they start administering this fee and then get sued?
They did. Yeah.
Okay. So they started in 2017 and then got sued.
And they got sued
By Libertas, I think.
Yeah. Originally, it was ruled as unconstitutional. The district court said that no, this is a tax. This is not a fee. This is a tax, and so they struck it down. And then now, upon appeal, the Utah Supreme Court reversed that and said no, this is a fee, and they remanded the decision back to the district court whether the fee bears a responsible relationship to the cost of the benefit. So a little bit of a technicality there, but the district court declined to rule on that. So the Utah Supreme Court upheld it in 2023, and since then, the legislature has tried to pass bills to establish a process for a transportation utility fee and to set up some guardrails on what it can be used for, what it can't be used for, and the types of reporting requirements that cities are required to do, etc. I'll get into that.
They've done that
later.
the last 2 years, 2 legislative sessions, and nothing has passed yet.
Right. Yeah. So kind of back to the timeline here. There's about a dozen cities that have enacted a transportation utility fee. It really cooled down at the time that the lawsuit was filed against Pleasant Grove, but then since the Utah Supreme Court ruling, there's a lot more interest, though some cities have been a little bit cautious because they've seen the discussions at the legislature and they wanted to see what the legislature would do. So far, they haven't been able to pass anything.
To my knowledge, Provo's the only one that has an electric bill there, that they provide their own electricity. These other cities are just adding it onto their water, sewer, and garbage.
Yes.
Most likely, yeah.
That's what Highland did, yes.
What's that?
That's what Highland did, yes.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the legislation because that sets the framework in considering how you might want to set up a transportation utility fee. Because we've seen some very consistent themes with the draft bills that have been presented. The first bill was presented 2 sessions ago, so in the 2024 legislative session. It was sponsored by Representative Karen Peterson and Senator Wayne Harper. And they worked pretty closely with the League of Cities and Towns and taxpayer associations to come up with language that satisfied both groups. You know, of course, this League of Cities and Towns is saying, hey, we want to make sure that we've got this mechanism that cities can use to maintain their roads well. And of course, the taxpayers associations want transparency and want to make sure that this is not a tax in disguise. So a couple of the key themes that came out of this bill is that they said, okay, if you're going to do a transportation utility fee, we're requiring you that you complete a study. Show us that you don't have existing funding sources for maintenance that you could already use. You know, show that there's really a need to enact a fee to increase your revenue for roadway maintenance. They want it to be a public process, needs to be adopted at a public city council meeting. And then they want annual reviews to show that the fee amount that you're charging is appropriate and then it's still needed. Like there hasn't been another funding source that's come online that would replace the need for this fee that you're charging the residents. And then one of the most important things is they said you need to establish the relationship between the amount that you're charging for the fee and the benefit received or the need created by those who pay the fee. So it can't be arbitrary. You know, there needs to be some relationship between what people are paying and what they're getting. And that's one of the key things that distinguishes from a tax, which is a much more general application. You're just taxing everybody to raise money for, you know, sometimes a general purpose as opposed to a specific purpose. And then they required that the fee is expires every 10 years, and that a city at that point would need to complete a new study if they wanted to continue a transportation utility fee. So that bill did not pass.
What does public adoption mean, in the sense?
Yeah, it's approved by the city council in a public hearing. And I think this bill said it needed to be separate from, you know, your general fee structure adoption. I don't believe that occurred in the next bills this past year. But that 2024 bill did not pass. It got pretty far, but it did not pass. And then there were 2 bills that the legislature took a run at this past session. One came out of the House and one came out of the Senate, and there was a key distinction between the two, and that was how they treated religious organizations.
And the first year, the previous year, that's what basically killed that bill. Is the LDS Church came forward and said they didn't want to be a part of that. They have been a part of that in Provo. They have been paying for this, for church buildings, for BYU. You can imagine the amount of traffic that BYU generates, not just from students, but also all the service providers that come and go. And they have a huge impact to the tune of maybe $200,000 to $300,000 a year in Provo City. They didn't want to have to pay that. And that's one of the main reasons why the church came forward and opposed this. This year, go ahead.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to mention that also happened in that first year 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's essentially why the bill just died. It seemed like it was supported by
Until the last
cities
hour.
and towns,
Until the last hour.
and the taxpayers associations, and then it did not move forward. So, yeah, 2 bills very, very similar language to the 2024 bill. A lot of the same principles about reporting, about adoption, about how you should tie the fee to the use. But the key distinction was the House said, we're going to continue to charge religious organizations. And so they put that into their bill. Meanwhile, the Senate excluded religious organizations in their bill. And then both bills went to the opposing body. The Senate took the House bill and said, hey, that's great. We're going to amend this so that religious organizations are exempted. And then they kept a few things out of that exemption. So they said, well, if it's a religious organization property, but if it's a warehouse or a stadium or a recreational property or a residential development, that can still be charged a fee. So they tried to narrow it more to churches and still allow things like, Cougar Stadium to be charged a transportation utility fee. So they sent that back to the House, and the House didn't take it up. So they let that bill die. And then meanwhile, the Senate passed their own bill. They sent that to the House, and the House didn't do anything with it either. So neither body could come to an agreement about how to treat religious organizations, and neither bill passed. So we'll see how that.
But it's going to be on the next year's. I mean, they're going to work out these differences over the next 9 months, and we're going to see it in January.
Yeah,
That's my guess.
it's hard to see the legislature just drop this completely.
Right.
I think this is a similar, kind of a similar environment to impact fees. You mentioned, Chris, that legislation came up about impact fees, I think a couple decades ago. Because cities started charging impact fees, and the legislature said, wait a minute, we need to have some sort of standardized process. So they enacted a law and created that process. It's a bit of the Wild West with the way cities would do impact fees. So we'll see, but I think we can be pretty confident that a lot of the key themes that were in the 2024 legislation that showed up in the 2025 legislation will continue to 2026. So making sure that this is transparent, making sure that it's not just a general tax, there's a specific use for it. Cities showing that they have a need for a fee and they don't already have existing funding sources that can cover their maintenance needs, etc.
Can I mention then? So currently today, it's legal to do this. It's been supported by the Supreme Court, and we listed a dozen or more cities that are doing this today. So it's already lawful to do this. There is no law or framework that's been created by the legislature regarding what Charles just demonstrated here. You need to have these guardrails and so forth. You have to come back every 10 years or every year you have to evaluate and so forth. There's nothing specifically in the law right now that tells us how to do this. But these last three pieces of legislation are very similar, and the one thing that stands out is the exemption for religious organization. So when he is going to move forward and propose what our fees might be, he will also make a very capable and easy to be able to plug and play religious organization component to say, okay, if we exempt them, then boom, we take them out, and then it's going to increase everyone else's this amount. If we leave them back in, it's going to keep everyone's back down. It's going to be a very simple process for us to model that. So that's one of the things we've asked him to do.
Did other nonprofits have an exemption as well, or just churches?
It was just churches. In fact, the Senate bill referred to some U.S. code language and said it has to meet, not 401c3. That's like another type of nonprofit.
Yeah.
But they referred to that designation in
501.
kind of U.S. code tax exemption.
But like the universities, state, would they be taxed?
They would. They would. They're not a religious organization.
Which is
They would
why
not be
the county
taxed.
sued them.
It would be a fee.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
That's a fee.
Fee.
Yeah.
They would have a fee charge. Thank you.
I guess I have a question. Couldn't that be tied to like vehicle registration rather than property taxes or utility taxes?
Please.
I think there's one way to do that. Does the city have authority to impose a fee upon vehicle registration?
No.
Or is it completely done in the
Yeah,
state?
because to me, you apply a fee to a residential unit where you've got one house where you have just one retired lady living there, versus the next door neighbor buys the house and they've got about 10 cousins living with them. If you understand what I'm saying?
Yep. Yeah. I know exactly what
True.
you're saying.
Can't argue.
The cousins are from Illinois.
Yeah.
That really strikes at the balance between proportional and easy to administer. Like the easiest way to administer a fee is everybody pays the same thing. Go the Highland City route, everyone pays $18.50 a month, or whatever it is. But you know, then
Part of the reason Highland did it that way is because Highland didn't have a lot of commercial. At least back when they imposed it. They may have a lot more now, but that was the reason why they did it that way, because they didn't have a lot of commercial to really deal with.
So it was mostly residential, 95% or whatever. And to speak to your point, Jim, it's like when we get older, we don't have kids anymore. We're still paying taxes for the school district, right?
Yeah,
But
well,
there's
it's for your grandkids then.
Well, okay. if they're still living here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean it's not 100% fair.
Yeah.
The more fair you make it, the more complex it gets, and then it becomes difficult to administer and maintain a system. Your billing staff are having a hard time keeping up with everybody's changing fee amounts. You know, well, I had my kids move out, so I should pay a fee less. Okay, you will reduce your fee. I've decided the most proportional way to do it is to station an attendant at every driveway in the city. They just collect a nickel every time a car comes in and out. And then you're charging people exactly for the exact amount of use they're incurring on the transportation system.
I guess you could meter every house, though, every time somebody drives out of the driveway or drives up in front of the house.
That would be the fairest way.
We thought about that for their sewer lines too, and thought, no, we can't put a meter on every single one of the 30,000 of them. It would be the best and fairest way.
But difficult to administer, right? It
Right.
takes a lot of resources to do it. So the overall process for determining a fee starts with understanding what is the maintenance need. So if you do an evaluation of your pavement condition across the city, then you can chart a course for what type of pavement treatments do we need to do in the next few years, and what's that going to cost. Then compare that with your existing revenue sources for maintenance. Identify what's the gap. How much money do we need to be able to maintain our roads regularly and save the city money in the long term. So with that funding amount identified, let's say it's $2 million a year, then we can go in and develop a fee structure. So that starts with a land use inventory. Let's understand all the different land uses we have citywide. How many commercial do we have? How many residential? And then apply a trip generation analysis. And this is where we get at, okay, some properties generate far more trips than others. Let's quantify that. Let's understand everybody's relative role in adding vehicles to the roadway network. And then with that information, we get into developing rate options. So there's more than one way to set up a rate schedule, and we can look at lots of different options to determine what seems the fairest, what's easy to administer, what do we think elected leaders will support, what do we think the public will support. I've noticed as I've done this for other communities that cities have different levels of sensitivity for, which properties types that they don't want to see pay too much, or that they're worried about their reactions. Some are saying, "Oh, we got to be careful about not making this too much for the businesses because we want the businesses to stay and new businesses to come." Others may be a little bit more concerned about the residential. Some are concerned about their religious institutions or other institution types. But you can take a look at that and slice and dice those categories different ways and see how the numbers play out. So as you go through those options, then you pick an option that you feel comfortable with, that you think will generate support, and then you go ahead and move to adopt the fee. So that's the overall process, and where we come in here is the feasibility study itself with these 3 steps, where determine what are the rate options, and then see how the math calculates, and set something up that's transparent and that people can understand. So that's just kind of going into things a little bit more in detail about how it's done. Let's walk through a simplified example. So I talked about trip generation analysis. We're doing an inventory of all the Orem City land uses, and we're determining how many trips they generate, right? So the Costco generates, 1,500 trips per day. The accountant office generates 10 trips per day. There's, some 20,000 homes, they generate 200,000 trips. Yeah, 200,000 trips per day. And then we divide that up. We can divide that up into 2 groups. In this example, we can divide up into residential trips and commercial trips, and how many each group generates. Then we can start to play around with the numbers. So let me zoom in here a little bit. All right, I like this.
It seems to me that some of the heavy users would never pay it. FedEx comes to our home and Amazon comes to our home, but they're not they're not located in Orem, they wouldn't pay that tax, correct?
Yeah, they're not a
Fee.
property within the city.
Right.
Yeah, so essentially their trips are
I'm paying
mostly
for them to come to
represented-
my home.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Same with every business that gets delivered from them as well.
Yep.
So
FedEx is in Vineyard. We do have UPS right here, and they're in Orem. So,
They pay some.
yeah,
So
they would pay a lot.
to add to that, you mentioned Costco. So yes, maybe half of the patrons at Costco are Orem residents, but the other half probably aren't. They're Provo, they're Heber, they're Vineyard, they're other places, and so you have to really account for that if you're going to be fair here. And you've got to account because that's a real issue. Same with the mall. You're bringing people from other cities into, which is part of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, we want them to, because the
course.
sales tax more than
But
offsets.
they're the ones also impacting our roads
mhm.
as much, if not more than us in some ways. Yet they may not be. If you're going to be heavy residential on coverage, then we're paying for that.
Yeah, every trip has two ends, and those two ends are not always in the city, right? You may leave home and travel to another city to shop or go to work. Meanwhile, you've got people flowing into the city from other origins, and they come to Orem City destinations. But the idea is we're just going to charge each property for the number of trips it generates, regardless of where those trips originate or where they end. So we'll never be able to fully capture the effect of every vehicle, because there are some cars that just travel completely through Orem and don't make a stop. So we're not necessarily capturing the burden that they put on our pavement.
But there is a sales tax component that does capture that. Utah County passed that.
Of course.
And so that's not where they are from,
But you're not
but it's where the
benefiting from
point
that.
of sale is actually taking
You're not
place.
really benefiting that much from that sales tax.
We are. It's about 2.4 million.
Okay. And what's your total maintenance per year for the Orem City for roads?
It's whatever we maintain, whatever we have the money for.
Okay.
We need more, and that's where this comes into play, is creating that gap, that delta. If we need X and we only have Y, then we need to make that X minus Y component fit here. So there are different revenue generators. One is, Charles mentioned, the excise tax, which is a gas tax. No matter where you are, when you buy gas, you're going to pay tax. And that's going to come back proportionately to, based on those different cities, based on their population and roads that they have within their cities. There's a formula for that the state manages. And then there's a different tax, which is the sales tax and the public transit tax that just went into place last year. And that generates more revenue, and that's based on point of sales, point of sale, regardless of where that person is from. If they come here from Provo or whatever, but they're at the mall, then we're going to capture that. And it's about 2.4, I think, is what the number is for that. And then our excise tax revenues is around 3.2 million. So all of those revenues that we have right now primarily are going towards our arterials and our collector streets in the city. What we've determined, and we're going to get into these details later, is that we are really sort of neglecting the local streets to the point where it's going to come to a point where we're going to have to reconstruct some of these, and it's going to cost a lot of money. We've been doing the crack sealing and the slurry sealing, but we have not been doing overlays or rebuilds of those, and that's the vast majority of our network is local streets, which we live on and drive on every day. But so there's a concern there that we have that's been becoming more of a concern over the last 10 years. We're going to present that to you at a future time probably, but go ahead, Charles.
So this exercise, let's use some round numbers to walk through the calculations. Let's say that Orem City needs an additional $1 million per year to maintain roads. And we've done the trip generation analysis where we've said, all right, citywide, 57% of the trips are residential and 43% are non-residential, meaning generated by non-residential properties. So that means that of that 1 million, if we say 57% of that is due to residential uses, then their share of the 1 million is 566,000, and the non-residential share is 433,000. we've identified that there are 25,000 residential units. So this total $566,000 per year divided by 25,000 units equals a fee of $22.67 per year per each residential unit. And that comes out to $1.89 per month. For the commercial, again, they generate 43% of the trips, but there might be far fewer commercial units compared to residential. In this exercise, let's say there's 2,000. That means the cost per unit per year is $216 per year, which equates to a monthly fee of $18.06. So, and then these graphs are just a visual way to look at it. You know, the percentage of trips generated, the number of units in each category, and then the last graph, the cost per unit per month. So here's a theoretical example of how we could go through this calculation with just two categories for property types.
Per million. You calculate it per million, so if you need 10 million instead
Oh, yeah.
of 1 million,
Yeah.
then you would times that by 10.
Exactly. Yep. Yep, you have to scale up that way.
And this example here does not take into account actual trips. So this is just numbers of units.
It does both.
Oh, is
Yeah.
this taking into account trips?
Yeah.
Oh,
It
no, the
starts-
trip gen does. Okay,
Right.
sorry.
Yeah, it starts here. We say how many trips are residential, and how many
Okay.
commercial.
But it doesn't break it down by land use.
Not specifically. So that's a kind of a simplified example. You can get more complex where you say, well, let's break up the residential into single family and multifamily because we don't want to charge multifamily units the same fee as single family units because data studies shows they generate fewer trips. And then commercial, we don't really like charging Costco the same fee as you know, the shoe repair shop. So let's break up commercial into various categories. So in this exercise, we'll say, let's do 3 categories. And let's choose, for commercial, let's choose trip thresholds of 100 trips per day and 300 trips per day. So our lowest categories, commercial properties, or I should say non-residential properties, generate fewer than 100 trips per day. Our next category is 100 to 300 trips per day. And then our final category is everything that generates more than 300 trips per day. So this is another way to break it down, and here's the trip generation accordingly. If I jump down to here, again, our totals are still the same. Our total residential in the last exercise was, I got there actually, we got the wrong numbers on this one, more than the commercial, about 50, I think it's like 54%, 57% versus 43%. But then we've broken down that further. So here's the trips generated by single family, and then here's the trips generated by multifamily. And here's the number of trips generated by all the properties in each commercial category. And then you take that and divide by the number of units in each group, and then you have your cost per month as shown in the graph. So I'll jump back to the table here. So in this exercise, the single family is now paying $2 per month, multifamily $1.46, and then here's the monthly cost for your 3 commercial categories: $1.39 for the lowest, $34 per month for the middle, and then $201 for the highest. So as you can imagine, there's lots of different ways. We could say, well, what about let's have 6 commercial categories, and you could set 5 thresholds to get your 6 groups. Or we can say, let's just have 1 commercial category, or you can get a little bit more specific and say, let's separate out the schools and the government properties like other communities have done. They have a separate public use category. That would be a 3rd group. But that's where this rate option development comes into play, and we'll play with the numbers and set up a tool where we can work with the city and say, what happens if we move these thresholds around? What happens if we change the funding target? What happens if we create more groups? And just work through those options and see what makes the most sense for the city. So that's essentially the way that we can develop that. This is a sample analysis. It's just kind of looking at 4 groups with a different funding target. One thing we have found with a lot of communities is you often have that highest group for commercial. Their fee tends to jump up pretty quickly. There tend to be properties that are outliers, like your big boxes, your Costco's and your Targets, which have a lot of trips, but there's not very many of those properties, and so they generate lots of trips, but there's a small number of units. So when you do the math with a large numerator and a small denominator, you get a pretty big fee. So that's one of the things we'll work through with the city. On the reverse side, with the residential, you got a lot of units. They don't generate as many trips per unit as the commercial, so their fees tend to be pretty low. So that's an overview of the process. Again, we've got legislative action that's got started the past 2 years but never concluded with a signed bill. We have a pretty good sense of what the legislature likes to see with a fee. We've seen examples from other communities of how they set up fees, what's worked well and what hasn't. And we have a process set up to prepare fee options for Orem City so they can be adopted in a way that meets a public process and would be compliant with the themes of the bills that we've seen in the past 2 years.
Charles,
Yes.
how have these been received by residential and non-residential groups? Do they just accept them, or has there been pushback in other communities?
Well, I think in a lot of cases, if it's part of an existing utility bill, a line item for $1.39 street fee doesn't catch a lot of people's attention. For the bigger commercial groups, these higher fee amounts sometimes do. It just depends on the property. If let's say, for example, in Provo's example, they do it via their electrical bill, right? Their electric meter. $200 a month can sound like a lot, but if you're, like a Costco or Big Box, your electricity bill is way beyond that.
My
So it's
experience is
relatively
opposite
small.
of that. My experience with Pleasant Grove, Highland, and Provo, when I dealt with that with the county, is the residents view it as a tax. And that was the argument that was made in the court. And so they had hearings, they had meetings, there's lots of pushback because they view it as a tax. So I think if Orem is going to consider this, that's what you should expect. You're going to expect some pushback. Because I saw that in other 3 cities when I was with the county. In fact, the county was opposed to those things. So I was involved in some of those meetings. So that's my take on it from my experience. But I had been pretty involved in this from the beginning, back in the day.
I think most of us, we react when we see a new fee, wait, what is this for? So there's been some good explanation and outreach beforehand, help everybody understand that, hey, we're doing this to save the city money because good roads cost less, and here's the proportional way that we've set it out. It goes a long way towards answering the questions that people have when they see
But
new
we're
fee.
not like other cities where their public has screamed about roads, and wanted to pass laws of how much money had to. I think our roads are in decent shape, so this will be, you got to help me.
Yeah.
As just a user on the road, I think they're in good shape. Why do I need to pay another $1.69 or whatever?
Right. Ironically, Tom, so the city that probably has the worst roads in the county, we're the ones where the law was considered to be not constitutional, right? Pleasant Grove. I think they're notorious for having some of the worst roads. And they proposed the fee, and then that was disregarded. Yeah. So you're right. We're gonna have a challenge, an uphill battle. I'm sure. I watched Provo City do it what was that, about 15, 18 years ago or so when they did that?
Yeah, but 2013 is when they started.
2013 or so.
2014.
And they had a lot of public outreach and public communication, a lot of education beforehand. And the mayor was directly involved with that, Mayor Curtis at the time. And I was really impressed at their efforts to do that. And they demonstrated, for example, the very first slide here, it shows it's really cheap to go along, and we're going to spend $1 here, and then in the next 10 years it's going to be $5, but in the last portion of this it's going to be $25.
Yeah.
So that's proportionate to putting in some crack seal versus doing an overlay versus doing a full-blown reconstruct. And we need to help and educate our public on that right now. The vast majority of our roads, what percentage of our surface area is local? Do we have an idea on that? 95%. And 95% of our streets are at a condition right now where we have to start considering an overlay, and we're going to be not too far out on a full-blown reconstruct on these roads. So we've been able to, I would suggest, lead along for 20 years without having this solution in place. We have a looming problem right now that we need to educate the public on. And it's 95% of our local streets are in that condition, that in a few years, 5 to 10 years, we might need to look at reconstructing a good number of them.
If we don't move from 1 to 4, to use your earlier numbers. We've been doing some ones, it's time for $4, right? To avoid the 25, the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, we need to consider overlays on a lot of those
And
streets.
those are the 4,
We've
right?
been band-aiding those. You see the crack sealing going on your roads, and you're like, oh, that's ugly, that's hideous. Well, that saved the life of that road.
Yeah.
That saved us and kept us to the dollar range versus the $25 range, because we're preventing the water from getting down in the road to the subsurface,
And
freezing, and then
cracking,
popping everything and cracking. We call it alligatoring, and then we lose the road. We can't do anything at that point. So we've done everything we can to keep it sealed the best we can. We do slurry seals as well for maintaining the oil and rejuvenating that over time. But it's going to require a large effort on our part to educate. We're just at the beginning.
Other questions?
We appreciate all the feedback. And I know that you've been down this road quite extensively on one side of the fence, I can see.
Well, and I've done,
but
well, I know about this too because I was the attorney for Public Works for years. So my only concern would be, are we a little premature? Because of the legislature, I think they're going to probably have a bill next year that's going to address this. It's going to likely authorize it by state law at that point. I know you have a court case.
yeah.
So it seems to me that we may want to hold off until we have that direction. It's only a year from now, and that's my thought, is to kind of hold off a little bit until we have that firm direction. I think we'll have it. We've almost had it now, but you never know.
I agree. Last year, so it was interesting. When was it 2017? When Libertas came in and sued PG, we were like, we had an agreement with Charles ready to sign, 2017, and Jamie Davidson said, we're not doing it. We can't do it because this is it's under scrutiny. It's being legislated right now and so forth. We're like, okay, we backed off. And then 2 years ago, when this legislation came on, we're like, okay, we're going to wait and see. And it was really hopeful. And then the last hour, then it was shot down. And we thought, okay, we're going to wait another year. So we did, and that's where we are today. So we've been waiting. What we'll have here is just kind of the skeleton, which is basically ready to plug and play when the legislation occurs, and then we could implement it at that time. But
And by the way, I'm not against it.
Right.
So it may come across that way. I've just been involved with it.
No,
I'm not necessarily against this because you're talking minor amount of money, really, for residents.
for residential, it could be out.
$1, $2, whatever the numbers you're showing here, depending upon what the numbers end up being.
Yeah.
But as long as it's reasonable, then I know we need roads, and I've dealt with that my whole career, and so I'm not against it. I just want to be very careful as we go through the process.
I agree. Thank you very much for your insight and your experience.
What's been interesting to me to see over the past 2 legislative sessions is it seems like really the only sticking point is how to treat religious organizations. That's what stopped the bill in 2024. That was the only difference between the 2 bills in 2025.
Which is also why Provo passed it, because at the time in 2013, they said 50% of their property in Provo was religious or other types of governmental entities.
Tax exempt, yeah.
Yes, mostly religion. BYU was their big one. And so when I talked to the mayor back in that time frame, that's what they were trying to do. It was to try to tax BYU.
And the further backstory is that Provo City at the time was getting maintenance money through bonding property tax. So they had this property tax issued, but 50% of the properties in the city were not contributing to that property tax.
Right.
And yet, they were the origin of about 50% of the trips. So they said, let's move away from that. Let's do something that everybody pays, and it's not tied to property tax, and it's not tied to a bond cycle that makes for irregular funding streams. This is more consistent. Now the money comes in regularly. They can adhere to a really good maintenance plan, and they're not, building for 3 years and then paying off the bond for 7 years, and then rolling what they didn't pay in that bond into the next bond, and they got out of a really bad bonding cycle. So they reduced property taxes at the same time that they started this fee mechanism, and it was overall about the same amount. Residential property taxes went down by an amount that was equivalent to the fee they even start to pay on their utility bills. I was really curious if the bills this year would be different than the one last year in 2024. But the language is almost the same. So it tells me that the taxpayer associations and the league have really come to a pretty solid agreement on a lot of the fundamental elements of what a TUF should look like. I don't expect that will change much in the future because I think they feel really solid about that. It's just mostly the religious organization treatment. And so that may be hashed out next year. We'll see. Both bills also allowed cities, gave them a 2-year grace period if they already had a fee that wasn't in compliance with the bill, 2 years to amend their process to become compliant with the bill. So I think there's a lot of good understanding of what a potential law in the future would look like. So I think if you just stay within those guidelines, you'll be square with any legislation that comes out next year. And then if there is a change to religious organizations, for Orem City, probably a relatively small change. There's several dozen religious buildings that could be, coded to be no longer charged a fee, and that you'd be meeting that intent if that's in fact what happens.
So Chris, is the study or is the recommendation today to move forward with the study?
We're doing the study right now.
You're already doing the study.
We started the study. We've been asked to do that, and then so we're coming back to the mayor.
Who's we asked? Did Brent ask you to do it, or?
We've talked with the mayor and Brent.
Okay.
Yeah, specifically, and then at our retreat in January, we talked about this as well.
But I didn't hear a direction at the retreat. We talked about it, but I didn't hear it. Go do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, we are doing the study based on the most relevant pieces of proposed legislation that have been come forward that are pretty consistent among the 3 different bills, and we're going to have numbers ready and available to consider. And then whether or not we adopt it this year or ever or next year after the legislation goes through, hopefully it'll pass. This will be 3rd time as a charm, I guess, with the legislature. So we could do it at that point. We just wanted to have numbers. We started our process to know what is that delta. If our gap is $2 million, how are we going? We have to figure out a plan to solve this $2 million deficit. If that's what it is, I don't know what the number is. We're in the process of evaluating that because that's a key piece of information that Charles is going to need, and then he'll be able to fairly, as best as possible, determine how to apply the fee to generate that revenue that we're lacking. So it's that delta is what we're looking at. I mentioned earlier our excise revenues right now, excise tax revenues are at about 3.3 million, 3.4 million, and then our sales tax and public transit tax, they're around, 2.4 I think is what we're at there. So we need more than that, and we're in the process of developing that plan for our local streets to figure out how to best target those. And we're going to look at those that are generally at the lower end of that OCI or condition index. If they're down around 50 or 40, then we know that we're going to have to start rebuilding some roads. We're trying to keep them up as high as we can right now. We've been doing that for the last 25 years, but the roads are old. They're getting older.
How I appreciate the explanation on simplicity versus fairness.
Yeah.
How are accessory apartments being considered in this study? Anyway, I'll let you respond to that.
Yeah, so I think what I would recommend that we do here with Charles is that we parse it out by single family versus those that are multifamily. And the multifamilies are going to be a percentage of whatever that single family is. And
Calling accessory apartments multifamily?
They would be considered a separate unit, yeah. I don't know. We haven't talked about it.
Legally registered as such.
Right. I personally think that accessory apartments are I understand simplicity versus fairness, but like with the sewer fee.
Yeah.
If you live in any neighborhood in Orem, you see how much illegal. It just seems to be a very poor metric to establish any kind of fairness, in my opinion, on road fees.
Would you charge them at 100% or a percent of a single family?
What's that?
For an accessory, would you charge them at a full amount of?
I would call it a single-family residential home.
Okay, so 100% of what a single family is.
I think you're not quoted it here. I think what he's asking is, would you charge a double fee, right?
Right. Would you pay the multifamily fee?
Each store would be charged a fee.
Yeah.
And then the accessory might be charged a reduced fee based on recommendations and analysis that Charles will be doing.
But then you've always got the question of legal versus illegal.
It's such an unclear.
Accessories are a challenge. There's no doubt about that. You know, we know of some, we don't know of all. And the ones we don't know about are usually the illegal ones. We don't know how many of those there are.
It's punitive to those that have done the fairness process, but so many are, with accessory apartments, so many are, some people rent them, some people don't, they just use them for their own family needs. Anyway, it's just it's a really poor indicator, in my opinion, of impact.
Yeah, and it's very small too.
Right.
Yeah, but I agree. I mean, that's something we'd have to do in our analysis, consider.
To answer your question, right now they're just in the maintenance phase, like what is needed for maintenance, and then dial down the details of what do we include and address the accessory apartment question in an upcoming discussion.
Those always seem to come up. If we're talking about single family versus multifamily, the multifamilies will have a reduced rate. That's where I was heading in this.
Right.
So like an apartment complex, a condominium complex, townhomes, and so forth, that'll probably have a reduced rate.
Is that generally because those units are less square footage and generate fewer trips? Is that?
Just on average, multifamily units generate fewer trips, tend to be smaller household size, fewer vehicles owned per unit. So studies show that apartments generate fewer trips than homes.
Well, when you say that, you're saying you got a fourplex, you're actually being charged 4 fees.
Yeah.
But they would be reduced. Like, I think in this one example, it was like $3.50 and then $2.60 or $3. It was a smaller amount. But there were more units on that same footprint of property.
But that, once again, that's an assumption that multifamily is not generating as many trips as a single family.
That's right, yeah, and that's based on data. There's national studies that generate that data and show it's pretty consistent nationwide.
So there's a manual called the Trip Generation Manual. It's produced by AASHTO, American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. And they produce that book and update it, maybe even annually, I don't even know. But they've gone into these kind of levels of details on apartments versus houses versus square footage of the different types of land uses. And it's a thick book on data that's collected nationally. So it's very well substantiated. I wouldn't say it's,
It's easy to use those types of resources to justify any categories because it's something we can point to. It's not something that we generated ourselves or
Right.
dreamt up.
These aren't guesses. They're based on, it's empirical data.
Isn't that where you get the trip generation data?
Yes.
Isn't that-
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Office,
I-
retail, movie theaters, etc.
So let me ask about AASHTO standards. Do they address cities that have a university in them, for example? I've looked at AASHTO standards, but I haven't looked at them recently. Do they have a specific, because we have a university here, of course.
Yeah.
And that does have an impact.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how that affects, does that address the AASHTO standards?
The published data has a university's specific land use, and they provide a trip generation rate.
Thank you.
Say, okay, at 1 point something trips per student.
One other question. So the legislation suggests every 10 years. Are you suggesting that this fee would be a set fee for a period of time and then it would be reevaluated at some future date, or would it be reevaluated annually? Or how would you address this fee?
The draft legislation actually asks cities to review their funding amounts annually.
Okay.
And then the fee would expire after 10 years, and you'd need to do a holistic study again.
Start
after
over.
10 years.
Yeah. I think there's good legislation. There's good language
Yeah.
in there, I think, on what's been proposed.
To think that annual review is intended for cities to look at, see if they need to make adjustments, like, oh, whoa, wait a minute, materials costs have gone way down. Our maintenance costs have decreased, therefore we can lower
Where do
the
you
fee
live?
across the board. Or they've gone up, or the city's made a decision to divert more money into roadway maintenance from another source. Therefore we've covered the gap more, a fee that can go down, or now the city council's robbed our maintenance money for something else, and now we need to increase it.
Watch them.
Does the language allow for an easy adjustment, unlike impact fees where you have to go through a significant study to adjust them? Does it allow, oh yeah, we're going to need a little bit more, we're going to adjust it 4% to account for inflation?
Yeah, in this case, as long as you show your work and you adopt it publicly, you can make adjustments.
So today, Chris, this is just for information
This
rather
is
than
information,
action. Okay.
letting you know we're in study mode. We're constantly evaluating all of our resources, all of our assets, and asset management is our middle name in public works. Whether it's a pipe, whether it's a street surface, whether it's a traffic signal, everything man-made will fail, and we have to operate it, we have to repair it, we eventually have to replace it. And so we're doing our due diligence and preparing a plan to help maintain the asphalt surface as it is today, but progressively applying additional treatments that might be needed that are going to be more costly in terms of overlays and eventually reconstruct if needed. And if, everything will need to be reconstructed at some point.
Right.
So to date, we've been focused on arterials and collectors, not so much on locals. And that's where our concern is right now today. We want to let you know we're starting to prepare these plans in more detail. We'll have more information for you and updates for you as we go along. And we're going to come forward with a plan that will address that funding need to fill that gap of that revenue deficiency that we have.
Thanks. This has been very informative. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your comments and direction.
Do we have any other questions regarding this? Okay. Any other business, Chris? Next meeting?
Just next meeting, yeah. We're coming up on summer here shortly. I don't know what everyone's summertime appetites are for meeting as a PWAC, and you got families and so forth traveling and trips and whatever. But May, if we're looking at May, third Tuesday would be May 20th. If we want to do the third Tuesday.
Works for me.
Is there anything that you all would like to see or to visit or to... So, for example, our water reuse project is going to be completed in around August. And that's a $20 million project that you all were made aware of and supported back a couple of years ago. It's one of our major capital facility projects that we have ongoing that's going to be wrapping up in the next few months. We could do a visit of that when it's completed or before that if you would like, or any other thing you would like to do a field visit on. We would be more than happy to take you if there's something you'd like to see. Central has amazing facilities as well that we've done visits up there at their hydroelectric facility and their treatment plant. We have springs and wells and so forth. We can take you to any visit of any of those sites. The 10 million gallon tank is buried. It's all completed from a construction perspective. It's not online yet. There's not much to see to go if you were to go over there. But just so you know, we would be more than willing to take you on a field trip of anything you'd like to see in the city.
Okay, anything?
Okay.
I think any of those would be great. So.
Okay. So May 20th, does that sound like, is that a Tuesday?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Adjourn. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to share that
Are
video with you.
the work meetings in
Sewer
the
line
council
replacement,
is that
the trenches we
certain
have.
time or-
It's pretty cool.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
When do they